These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. I got my first trail camera when I was 10 years old. It took 8 D-cell batteries and had a roll of film, and I set it up on a dead cow to see what would come in on it. I was so excited to take that roll of film to town, get them developed, and when I got my photos back, it was mostly just blurry photos of ravens and magpies, but in one of them, in the dark, I could see all these eyes circling this cow off in the distance, just glowing in this big bright flash of this giant, awkward camera. But I was so excited by that I just knew that I'd be running game cameras forever. And they've changed so much since then. The best of the cameras now are made by Tacticam. So these reveal cell cameras will work in places that have basically no cell service at all. So I can get cell service on the camera when I can't get it on my phone. They have live view. They've got active GPS. So if a bear packs my camera off, I can find it again. Or if I forget about it, definitely have done that. I can change all of the features through the app on my phone. The photos and videos just get sent to me. And ultimately, this makes me a better hunting guide because I can monitor a really wide area without going in there and disturbing the wildlife in that area, right? I'm just getting the intel back and making decisions based off of what I'm seeing on those cameras. If you want to learn more about Reveal, go to www.tacticam.com and check out their newest camera. That's the Ultra. That's the one that I'm using right now. And it's, simply put, the easiest and best trail camera that I've ever used. So go check it out. What is a cowboy?
I don't know. I think it's as simple as somebody that makes a living working cattle, but I think you can make it a lot more complicated than that if you want to, because there's kind of this big push that everybody's a cowboy, and I don't know. That's an interesting question. And you being a military guy, I think about that a lot. You know, you go into the military and you move up in rank, and that, you know, you can look that up and see what people have done and where they've been, and it's not necessarily true with cowboys. And so, like, you can't look that up. You kind of take their word on it, and there's no real description of it. So I think we need to be inclusive as possible, and everybody is welcome in the industry that wants to be a part of it. But that word cowboy has gotten pretty diluted, I think, because my heroes growing up were cowboys, and
Sure.
I don't know if that word means the same thing that I thought it meant when I was a kid.
There's a lot of dress-up cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different thing.
Right.
Rodeo cowboy is a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost like today they're athletes. Like that's a professional sport that requires a huge amount of athleticism and honestly is treated as such. But while there is versions of athleticism that are required to be a cowboy in the truest sense of the word, not necessarily. Like there's some cowboys out there who are out of shape, who are broken, very broken. You know, you're not going to expect them to do a lot physically, but it's still a physical job and they're still capable of it. You know, and when I started guiding up here, I was 14 years old and I was doing backcountry trips back into the wilderness here with horses and mules. And the camp cook was named Benny Banks. And Benny Banks was 86 years old and he could ride all day long, but he could only get on his horse once a day.
Mm-hmm.
And he rode this gray mare. I remember she had this huge divot in the right side of her neck. Looked like you'd scooped like a fist-sized chunk out of her neck. And she'd been up there in one of those camps back in the wilderness, tied up to a high line, and elk had blown through camp. And she got down and had her head cranked up there for a while and just never healed up right. So she could turn to the right really well on a switchback, but to the left it was a little bit awkward, you know?
Yeah.
But even something like that, I would look at Benny Banks and say, yeah, you're a cowboy. Had nothing to do with cattle, right? He was a horseman. He was cooking in the backcountry. But I would call him a cowboy, you know? So it is a difficult thing to describe. When I get pressed on it, I say that it's a profession. And like what you're describing, if you're cowboying, you are working cattle, it's going to involve a horse at some point. You need to have some skills that go along with that to qualify that you're capable of that job. What are some of those skills?
I think horsemanship probably is number one. Because what I see a lot of is there's being a good cattleman or being a good horseman doesn't necessarily make you a good cowboy. But I think both skills are required to be a good cowboy. So, like the place that I worked on, he's like my adopted grandpa. He's a great cattleman. Everybody knows him for his bulls, his bloodlines, you know, that sort of stuff. Not a great horseman at all, and doesn't claim to be. And on that particular outfit, they don't. You know, we didn't hardly ever rope stuff. You know, so nobody's a great roper. We could take them back to the pens if we needed to doctor them or whatever. So I think that's where it gets really into the weeds with what's a cowboy. Because if you're talking to somebody from LA or Portland or New York City, probably anybody that's ever been out bucking bales of hay and branding calves is a cowboy, really, in their mind. And they're probably not wrong, but you get amongst cowboys, guys that do it for a living, and they have a whole different kind of standard to who they would refer to as a cowboy. Like there's 3 or 4 guys in my mind that I think that guy's a cowboy. And guys like that, they know how to they're good with horses. They make their own horses. They're usually pretty good with a rope. They know how to doctor whatever they come across. You know, it's kind of debatable with machinery stuff. You know, some people say cowboys don't ever get off their horse, so they're not fixing fence, they're not fixing tractors, they're horseback all the time. But you can't really run a ranch that way either. So there's kind of a divide there, I suppose,
There's definitely a difference between being a rancher and being a cowboy.
Absolutely.
A lot like the difference between being an outfitter and being a guide. Yeah. It's a little bit more inclusive and business minded, I think, if you're on that other side of things. Not to say that you aren't doing all the cowboy jobs as well. I've seen the we don't get off our horse thing taken to extremes where cowboys are out there like building gates without getting off their horse and taking 7 times longer to do a job because of the principle of the thing.
Exactly.
And while I think that's ridiculous, I also respect it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And then like if people don't have that sort of pride in the idea of being a cowboy or that sort of definition of it, if you don't have people that think that way, I think it kind of dies, you know, that you need people like that don't want to get off their horse. There's plenty of guys nowadays that they're 80 years old and they're still horseback all the time. Like you're saying, you know, that old guy that would be horseback every day. There's a guy that works for my grandpa that just got inducted in the Cowboy Hall of Fame. He's 85 probably now, and he's horseback every day going and pulling cows out that are in heat when we're AIing and stuff. You know, he's a guy that rode every day of his life, and he could much easier just hop on a four-wheeler and go do the same job. But I think there's a lot of that pride in the history of what cowboys used to be and still are, and so people refuse to let that go, and that's kind of what keeps the heritage alive of the whole idea of being a cowboy.
The way it gets portrayed in pop culture and some media is that cowboys are disappearing. But if you go to, like, you know, Ian Tyson lyrics, you just can't see them from the road. Mm-hmm. And I still feel like that's very true. Like, there's plenty of people all over the country and around the world who are cowboying, mm-hmm. and not in a flashy way. They're just doing the job, and there's a lot of requirement for that job. Now, I say around the world. Give people a little bit of background on yourself and some of the places that you've worked.
Yeah. So when I was 21, I had rode bulls starting probably at 14, and I rode them all through college. I had a scholarship at the University of Wyoming rodeo, and I had a pretty bad wreck in Casper where a bull kicked me in the head, and I didn't retire after that, but it was a downward spiral from there on out. I never really bounced back. I never had.
Was that in college rodeo?
It was a college rodeo in Casper.
Were you wearing a helmet?
I was wearing a helmet. I wasn't wearing the nicest helmet. I was real broke in college, so
Sure.
Somebody had given me a secondhand lacrosse helmet.
Yeah.
And so that lacrosse helmet was more so to just keep from breaking my face. I don't think it really took impacts from the side very well. So I got kicked right in like the bottom part of my skull in the back of my head. And that put me out. And I don't remember exactly what had happened, but I had a bunch of blood on my brain, and they had to put me in that big tube machine and stuff and scan my brain. And it ended up all being okay. But if you don't show up riding bulls, if you don't show up to win, you don't need to be getting on. Mm-hmm. That's not a part-time sport. You got to be there to be the best. And basically what happened from there on out is I was just not as invested. The fear was at a higher level than the desire to win after that wreck. So that kind of petered out and left a big void in my life. And I thought, well, what can I go do now to kind of fill that void? And I had seen a video on YouTube of these guys catching feral cattle in Australia, and I thought that looks pretty fun. So
it's pretty wild.
It's very wild.
Yeah.
Probably in retrospect, no safer than riding bulls. But it looked like something that would kind of fill that adrenaline void that I was looking for.
Uh-huh.
So there was a gal that she was doing a study abroad program at the University of Wyoming. She was Australian. And I asked her, I said, is there any way you could get me a job doing that? And it took some convincing, but finally she said, okay, well, here, actually, my brother actually owns a crew that does that. So here's his info. He was texting me off of this was 10 or 11 years ago. So he was texting me off a sat phone, but 10 or 12 years ago, those things hardly worked. And he had to have it pointed perfectly north towards Asia to get it to work. And so I asked him all these questions. What do I need? Where am I going? All this stuff. And he would respond with like 4-word emails, not telling me much other than be on the Kawanyama airstrip this day at this time. So I just figured the rest out by myself. But
was that up north?
That's northern Queensland. So Cape York, right on the ocean on the northern part.
I spent a month there last year.
Yeah, it's wild. Like when I didn't know this when I went there, but after talking to Australians since then, they really, like the outback, or what they call the outback, which is more the center of the country, there's just nothing there. It's the desert. But Cape York, there's a lot of wildlife, and but it's still a very unsettled part of Australia, and you've got feral cattle and bangtangs and buffalo and crocs and all the snakes that can kill you. Everything up there is dangerous, but it's not easy to access, so it's still a very wild part of Australia.
Yeah, it takes some effort to get there. I flew into Darwin, hunted up in Arnhem Land, and then we drove to Cape York from Arnhem Land.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So down through, you would have gone down through Normanton and all those little towns. Yeah.
And they're tiny towns.
Mm-hmm.
That was a 36-hour drive, and I think the biggest town might have had a couple hundred people in it.
Right. And there probably wasn't any paved roads, or not many.
There were some strips where it would be paved, one lane in the middle for the road trains.
Mm-hmm.
The semi-trucks pulling 5 trailers. Chaos. And then, big shoulders off each side so you could get the hell out of the way if you were oncoming or trying to pass them. But, yeah, I had no idea just how rural and spread out Australia was. And I've talked about that on the show plenty, but now it's interesting that you're in Cape York. That's real thick country too.
Mm-hmm.
They get huge amounts of rain during the rainy season, and the vegetation that grows there grows so rapidly, and it is just incredibly thick, and that paper bark and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine running cut off Land Cruisers and 4-wheelers and dirt bikes.
Yep.
Stuff through that. Be pretty sporty.
Yeah, there was. I mean, pretty much every guy that worked for our crew broke. Had a big wreck.
Yeah.
One per season was pretty normal. There was plenty of guys that had more, but another, probably the most dangerous thing when you were flying on those machines was the termite mounds.
Yep.
And it's not the great big tall ones sticking up, because you see those. The termite mounds that were about a foot or two tall, that were just below grass level, you'd be going 40, 50 miles an hour on a dirt bike or in one of those cruisers and hit one of them, and they're rock hard. And they'd flip your cruiser, or you'd go right over the handlebars of your bike and break your collarbone. So it seemed like that whole crew I worked with, everybody was in a cast or stitched up or something at some point. It was a pretty rough way to make a living.
Did you have the magnetic termite mounds there as well? Did you ever see those?
I don't know about that.
I mostly saw those in Arnhem Land, but there was two types. There was like the red type that would come up like a cone, and then there was these gray ones that looked like a tombstone, and they would run north-south, every single one of them, which is just mind-blowing to me, because you've got this colony of termites. I don't know if colony is the right word, but you've got a whole bunch of termites that none of them are living as long as it takes to build this thing, and some of these would be 6 to 10 feet tall, and they all figured out how to work collectively to build these things north-south.
Mm-hmm.
That is fascinating.
That's pretty amazing. Something built into those bugs that they could feel it.
And they would be right next to the other type of termites that were just heaps,
Right.
So wild. That's what we used to sight in our bows when we got there. This dude Maddie came over and picked me up from Darwin. And I said, do you have a target so I can shoot my bow? I just came a long ways. I want to make sure this thing's right. He's like, oh, we'll just shoot a termite heap. I was like, okay. That's what we did.
Were you hunting pigs?
We hunted pigs. We hunted water buffalo, hunted axis. Yeah.
I follow a page over there that it's like two guys that do a bunch of pig hunting together. I wonder, they've got like 100 and something thousand followers. I can't remember. It's something in Maddie. Yeah. I don't know if it would have been those guys.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, the pig hunting is such a big deal in Australia.
Yeah, that was my first time ever being around pig hunting. Like being in Wyoming and Colorado my whole childhood, we don't deal with pigs. So that was the first time. The same dogs we had, I guess they were pit bulls, but pit bulls are illegal in Queensland. So we would always have to be careful talking about that. But all the guys I worked with, we would use those. They would bring their dogs out and they would plate them up for pigs, but we would also use them every day catching cattle, because they would just get a hold of that bull's nose.
Yep.
And especially if you're on your own, having something to distract the bull.
Yep.
So you could throw it down, because we would pull these bulls down by their tails.
Yep. And
so if you didn't have a machine or you're on your own, a dog could save your life, really. Because that dog would distract the bull and take him off one way, and you could get your job done, or maybe escape if you needed to.
Yeah.
So they were a very important part of life up there, having those super tough dogs.
And some of these areas have so many wild cattle on them that people would buy cattle stations that might be 500,000 acres or bigger, and then they could pay off their land by mustering the cattle that was on it.
Mm-hmm. So that was the crew I worked for. That was kind of what we were doing. We had the contracts on 3 different stations, and one of them was an Aboriginal community. Mm-hmm. And those cattle had reverted back to nature, essentially. It had been 60 years since they'd done anything with them. And so there's no fences, no nothing. And they hadn't recently bought that place, but I guess they were in some sort of financial trouble. And so the bank said, why don't we just hire a group of guys to come in and catch all these bulls, and the money you make off the bulls will get you out of the financial trouble you're in. So we just worked with Aboriginal dudes the whole time, catching bulls on that Red Lily station. And that was the wildest part, because those kind of well-managed stations, they did their best to make sure that the feral bulls didn't get out of control. And so there was much less of them. They were all just white Brahmin or red Brahmin cattle. And then you went on to the Aboriginal side of things, and it was every color and type of cattle you could imagine. It's 50% bulls, 50% cows. So I think we caught 3,000 bulls while I was there, and we hardly put a dent in that population.
Right. And then a couple years later, it's right back to where it was.
Exactly. And and those bulls in Australia, they get smart, so they'll, cows and calves and stuff, they kind of ball up and stay together. But those bulls, if they hear a chopper coming, some of them will jump into the herd, but a lot of them head the opposite direction and brush up, and you'll never see them or catch them. So that they'll be there forever.
So talk me through this little Mad Max scenario that goes on when you're mustering, and all the vehicles and communication, and how you're actually capturing these bulls and then getting them onto a truck.
Right. So we had guys in choppers that would go out and do a lot of scouting for us, and they would help muster the big bunch of cows and calves and stuff, but they would also radio down to us and say, I've got 3 bulls over here by this, what they would call it a sand ridge.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're on a bike looking across the flat, you don't see a ridge of any kind. But where the eucalyptus trees grow, that's where when during the wet season, they wouldn't be underwater because it was 2 or 3 feet higher in elevation, so the trees would grow there. So that took me a long time to figure out. When they kept talking about ridges, they just meant like the tree groves.
Yeah.
And so they'd send us into there and flush out a bunch of cattle, and we'd get them out on the flat. And so you'd have to ride up next. If you're on a motorbike, you ride up on the right side of the bull, and you'd reach off with your left hand, and you'd grab the brush on the end of their tail and wrap it as many times as you could. And then you would accelerate with your right hand and turn right away from them. And it would essentially be like a pit maneuver. You'd pull their hips out around, and then they would topple over, and you'd have to dump the bike and run back and jump on that bull and try and hold it down and get their feet tied together so that you could come back and get them at a later time, a couple hours later with a truck.
And how big is a wild Brahma bull?
They'd be probably anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 pounds. And they're like rodeo bulls with big horns that aren't tipped. Like they could gut you in a heartbeat if they got you.
Had you ridden motorbikes much before that?
Yeah, I grew up riding dirt bikes. So luckily I was pretty at home on one of those dirt bikes. And I'm better on a dirt bike than a horse.
Yeah.
Like I'm not a great horseman, but I could get a lot done on a dirt bike. So I've still learned a lot of tricks from those guys. So I think one of the biggest weaknesses to using dirt bikes with livestock is you can't turn them really sharp. And so if something goes, you turn off to the right a little bit and it goes left, you got to do a full circle to get back to them. But those guys showed me this trick where they would essentially lay the bike almost on the ground, and you'd have the seat of the bike against your calf, and you'd like spin that bike on a dime, and then you could take off after those cattle. So it was pretty wild. But they all used those Honda 230s because they were indestructible. You could dump those bikes over and over and over, and they're air cooled, and they're light, and they're cheap. So everybody rode Honda 230s.
That's pretty sporty. I imagine the first time you tried to wrap your left hand around the tassel on a 1,500-pound bull's tail and knock him down by sending your motorcycle off to the side. Did you get it right the first time, or did it take some trying?
No, it took a lot of trying. And if you were lucky, that was kind of like the pinnacle of catching, if you could do it off a bike. A lot of times the easier way is you would run those cattle those bulls until they were kind of blown out of air. And then you just dump your bike and run. Because then that way you don't have to worry about a bike and a bull. You can just be on foot and a little bit more agile. So I did way more of that, just dumping my bike once the bull was done running, and I'd run up there and get a hold of the tail. And hopefully, those bulls, most of them, their horns weren't quite long enough that if you didn't let go of the brush of that tail, they couldn't hook you. There was a couple that had great big long horns that still could get you. But for the most part, even if you couldn't knock them down yourself, as long as you didn't let go of that tail, you were probably safe.
Probably safe sounds not so bad. Yeah. How long were you in Australia mustering?
I was there for 4 months.
4 months.
Yeah.
And then where did you go?
I went back to the U.S. because I had to finish my college degree. That was kind of my summer months. and I had 1 semester of college left. So went back, finished college, realized that I talked to some people that they were like, man, it doesn't matter how educated you are if you don't speak a second language. I'm getting passed up for job opportunities by people that maybe have a high school education, but they're bilingual versus somebody with a master's that can't speak a second language.
Did you tell him
Spanish?
Did you tell him you could speak Bogan?
No, but that probably wouldn't help me too much. But you had to learn a whole nother language in Australia. That's for sure.
Oh, it's not English.
Yeah.
No, it's way off. They've got a different word for everything.
Yeah. And those Aboriginal guys specifically their accent is even thicker, and they kind of used some of the native tongue mixed in there.
Yeah.
So for the first month I was there, I had a hell of a time understanding those guys.
It's almost like a pidgin Australian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. Interesting cadence too. Yeah. I wish I could do a better imitation of it, because the Aboriginal guy that we were hunting on his place when we were buffalo hunting, he said, basically the crocodile, him here is shy, but don't get water from same place twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
that's good advice.
The way he delivered that was so funny and casual. It's like, there's only one way to learn that lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. So where else have you worked?
So I started looking for a place after I graduated. I thought, I've never taken a Spanish class in my life, so the fastest way to learn is just immerse myself. So I looked at Mexico, and Mexico seemed too dangerous at that time. And I looked at Brazil, but Portuguese wasn't really going to be helpful to me, I didn't think. And so I ended up in Argentina. Mm-hmm. And I worked on several ranches down there with gauchos. I never made it down to Patagonia, to the southern part of it, but I worked a bunch in the center, kind of on La Pampa, on the flat grasslands. And then I went up and worked right on the Brazilian border in Corrientes, which is pretty swampy. It's like the southern fingers of the Amazon kind of still reach down to that part. So there was still capybara and, monkeys and stuff like that in that part of the country.
And what was cowboying like down there with the gauchos?
The language barrier was serious, and it made things pretty tough at first, because I guess I had grown up with a lot of Latinos my whole life, and so I had kind of been around Spanish, but I took for granted that even my friends' parents, maybe that weren't fluent in English, they still knew some English, and you could kind of get by. When I got down there to Argentina, a lot of those folks, they didn't speak a word of English, so there was no kind of guessing at or trying to speak some English to them to see if they'd get it, because that wasn't going to happen. So it was a lot of learning on the fly with the language stuff, and I used that Duolingo app. I'd use it for 20 minutes a day and then go try and practice those words once I had learned some new words. But those guys, it was a tough way of living, and that was the first place I ever met an adult that couldn't read. Mm-hmm. To my knowledge, I had never met somebody before that was illiterate. But the first ranch I worked on, the ranch manager was hell of a cowboy. But I remember having him having his son, who was in like 4th grade, come over and read a bottle to him. And at first I thought maybe he didn't have his glasses or something and couldn't see. And it just never occurred to me, this guy, he can't read the dosage on this bottle, and he needs to know what we got to give these cattle. So he had his son come read it to him. And so it was really interesting being around guys like that. They lived in mud huts their whole life. That particular guy had lived on that same ranch his entire life, worked there his whole life, same as his dad and his grandpa, and his son was there, probably going to end up taking his position as the ranch manager. And it was my first time really being around that type of livelihood, I guess.
The people I've been around, different parts of the world, who can't read or write, they have this other knowledge base that more than makes up for it. Right? Mm-hmm. They're extremely skilled and in tuned with something else that almost fills up that data space that might have otherwise been filled with reading and writing.
Right. Yeah. And he could do some math, but I never could catch on to how they did it. But they had this, anybody that's been around livestock knows that counting cattle through a gate is a very important skill to have, but it can be tough, and
it's really hard,
especially when it's big numbers of animals you're trying to count in the hundreds. And they had this whole system with rocks that they would have a pocket full of rocks, or before that would start, they'd get off and get a handful. And I don't know exactly what they were doing. They were always almost dead on with their counts. But the owner of the ranch told me that a lot of those guys couldn't really count to more than 10. So it was some sort of, systems of 10 that they were doing with the rocks. And I don't know if it was accurate, but it was a totally different way of counting and math. And
it was
stuff.
a base of 10.
Yeah, is what it came down, because I think it came from the fingers.
Right.
So that was kind of what they knew, but there certainly wasn't any, dividing or multiplying. That was not in their wheelhouse. But they could do 10. They could count on their fingers and then drop a rock or pick one up or something and just keep track of those tens and work off of that.
That's a pretty accurate assessment of my ability to do math also. Yeah, except I wouldn't get the count right. Feeding cattle and stuff around here, every day that we fed, you'd count and make sure that everybody was there. You could have 3 people on the truck counting cattle where everybody knows the number that it's supposed to be. And usually you got to count more than once and end up like kind of going with the number in the middle of what everybody saw. Yeah. It is a really difficult thing. Mm-hmm. You're trying to count 179 head of cattle that are moving around. Mm-hmm. It's really, really hard. And some people are so good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can run cattle past them that are, 4 abreast, and they'll tell you how many cows and steers and heifers. Mm-hmm. And it's incredible what some people can do. I'm not one of them.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like it's a, kind of a visual thing. I assume is, people can count in groups better than others or something like that. Cause over the years of counting cattle through gate, I've tried to, do I count in 2s? Do I count in 4s? Like, what can I remember? And I think some people process that better, even if they're not great at math, that counting something going by you quickly as, and not lose your count. Because if you lose your count, you got to start all over again.
Yep.
There's no, like, hold on, guys, let me just get this sorted out. They're coming whether you like it or not. And so then you got to just start again, or you don't get your count.
Yeah. Yeah. It's challenging. So how long were you in Argentina?
I was down there for 3 months, and I intended to stay a lot longer because I had just graduated college and I had no real plan. So I thought I would just stay until I ran out of money or whatever happened. And what cut me short was I got what they think is Zika virus while I was down there in the swamp. And I just got really sick and really pale. But their medical system, Medicare system down there is not great. And so when I started getting that sick, I had ridden on the fender of a tractor on a pretty rough road about 2 hours into the ranch headquarters I was at. And I thought, if something real bad is happening, I don't want to be out here. So I made it back into the city, and I spent the very last remaining cash that I had to buy a ticket home. And when I went to the doctor, I had stage 1 liver failure.
Wow.
And they couldn't figure out, they said I had at 23, I had the liver of like a 50 or 60-year-old alcoholic. And they did all the tests. They tested me for hepatitis A, and they tested me for different sorts of like hereditary type things, and none of it came back. And they said, we're pretty sure this is probably a mosquito-borne thing, probably Zika, but we don't deal with that up here. So basically they just sent me on my way and said, come back in a month and we'll see if it gets better. And it did. So we just kind of left it at that.
There's not a lot you can do with viruses.
Right.
Yeah.
They just and your liver is also, if you don't scar it, is very resilient. It can generally repair itself. So
that bounced back decently for you?
Yeah, it came back, and I don't drink anymore. But I was, after that, they told me I had to eat really clean, no drinking while that repaired itself, and it did. And then I went back to drinking, and I never really seemed to have problems with that until I guess I was when I was 30 or just before I turned 30, I started to kind of feel similar to how I had felt in Argentina. I never went to the doctor for it, but I thought, you know what, this is probably enough drinking anyhow.
Yeah.
So I just quit, and I haven't touched it since.
It's not good for you.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's poison in your body, and you know, I have nothing against people that drink. I'm around it all the time. Like I shoot music videos for a living. I'm around musicians. I'm in honky tonks. I do all this stuff all the time. So I have zero issue with drinking or being around it. But some people have a brake pedal and some people don't. And it was just something that I personally could not handle. So I just let it go.
All right. So now we've cowboyed in North America, South America, and Australia.
Mm-hmm.
You get it out of your system, or did you feel like you needed some more?
Well, I thought it was out of my system, and I went and I started my own livestock company. I went and bought a bunch of goats here in the U.S., and I was trying to do prescriptive grazing with them and all this stuff. And that, I won't say too much about it, but I got myself in a pickle with one of the guys I was working with, and I pretty much lost everything. I sold those goats for a fraction of what I bought them for. I had sold everything that I owned, my diesel pickups, horse trailers, all that stuff to buy these goats. And so I had a $600 Buick Skylark, and my 15-year-old brother was living with me, and we were just homeless living out on the BLM out of this little Buick car. I had a saddle on top and 2 dogs in the back, and me and my brother camping. And I was in pretty bad shape. I was pretty depressed at that time. And my brother, he said, well, why don't you just go back to doing what you enjoy? Why don't you keep traveling? And I thought, well, maybe, but all my friends are getting jobs and stuff. I don't, it might be time to grow up. And he said, this was the first time it was ever mentioned to me. He said, well, you've worked as a cowboy on 3 of the 6 possible continents. Why not go for the rest? And when he said that, then it clicked. And I thought, wait, why not? That would be kind of cool. So I had taken a course called Ranching for Profit. That's like a week-long kind of crash course in business class for ranchers. And in that class, I met a gal that her family had a big ranch in Sweden. And so I thought, well, I'll ask her if she'll hire me, because that would knock Europe off my list. So I called her up. She said, yeah, no problem, come over. Her family hired me for 3 months to come over there and work in Sweden. So I worked on the largest cattle ranch in Northern Europe for, I think I stayed 89 days because my visa was for 90.
What kind of cattle were they running?
So that place was really interesting because they that outfit was so big. In Sweden, you didn't really see these great big 1,000 cow outfits. Everybody was running 30, 40, 50 cows. Was a pretty big place. And so this family had an exceptional deal because they leased the military base there, and they just wanted the grass kept short enough that they could still use these fields for drills and stuff.
Yep.
So they ran, I think it was somewhere around 1,600 mother cows.
Wow.
And with that size of herd, there's really not, you inevitably are going to have every genetic string of cattle in Sweden in that herd pretty quickly. And so importing DNA or importing semen was really hard to AI your cattle. It was very expensive. Hormones were illegal, so you couldn't synchronize the cattle. And so we had to go out and just buy bulls from all these different operations and hope we had enough to get all these cows bred. And so it was a mixture of every breed you could possibly think of in Europe. We had Charolais, we had Simmental, we had Angus, we had, I think there was some Hereford in there too. And they were the biggest cattle I've ever been around anywhere in the world.
Sure.
And that was because, like in the U.S. or most places that kind of are used to rangeland cattle, when they tell you a number that you can run there, it's partially based off of weight because people understand bigger cattle eat more grass. Over there, because that's not a normal thing, they just gave them a number of cattle they could run. So it made more sense to run the biggest possible cattle because then you got the most pounds of beef
right
at the end of the day. So massive, massive cattle.
When I lived in Norway, whale was cheaper to buy at the grocery store than beef.
Right.
Beef was incredibly expensive. And Norway is taxed like incredibly. Like they have so many taxes that are over 100% the value of the item.
Mm-hmm.
It's less so in Sweden, but was beef really expensive in Sweden as well?
Yeah, very expensive. And that it was a very stark difference coming from Argentina, where labor is super cheap and the best way to get anything done is just hire more guys. But in Sweden, it's so expensive to have an employee because you're essentially, for them to have a livable wage, you're paying them double because the tax rate is so high on their salary. So those in Sweden, everything that could be done by a machine or a robot was done by a machine or robot. It was cheaper to have brand new equipment that was automated than it was to hire guys long term to work for you. So that 1,600 head outfit, they had 2 full-time employees that worked there.
Were you horseback over there?
Yeah, so that family had spent a bunch of time traveling around the world. The dad and 2 of the daughter and the son, all of them had worked in Canada, the U.S., and Australia. And they had seen the value in working cattle really slow and quiet and low stress. And I guess the previous people that were running on that place used machines, but they wanted to use horses. So that stuff is not normal over there in Sweden. So they would import everything, all their saddles, their cattle working facilities, all that stuff. They either built it themselves or imported it. And the horses, you can't just go buy a cow horse down the road because nobody does that. So they would buy all these hunter-jumper reject horses, and they made them themselves. So the daughter had come over here to the U.S. and worked for a pretty prominent horse trainer and learned from him how to make a cow horse. And then she went home and started turning jumping horses into cow horses so that they could use them on the ranch.
Did that work, using warm blood hunter jumpers to cowboy off of?
Yeah, they were pretty good. They certainly weren't. You weren't going to go win any cutting shows or anything with those things, but they were better than walking, I guess. And
Sure.
they could. It was illegal to rope over there, so nobody roped anything. So it was, as far as just getting around a pasture and pushing cows, they did a great job.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
It's funny the things that are illegal in different places, especially in Europe, Australia too. Like, for such a lawless people, they also kind of abide by a lot of laws that we would flat out not accept here in the States.
Happen.
Yeah, like no way. But they're also just so rogue. Archery is illegal in Norway.
I did not know that.
Yeah, you can't bow hunt.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was shocked when I said, why don't we just rope that sucker? And they're like, no, if somebody sees that, we're in big trouble.
Interesting.
And branding cattle with a hot iron, you could do it, but you had to knock the cattle out first.
Okay.
You had to, give them painkillers and then tranquilize them before you could do it. So it essentially made it not worth doing.
Did they freeze brand or did they just not brand?
They just didn't brand, and ear tags were a huge thing over there. So their biggest hurdle that they dealt with in Sweden was the government by far, just the regulations they had to deal with. So all of their cattle had these like RFID tags in them.
Right.
And so many, I think it was 3 or 4 times a year, those cattle had to come through a chute with an official RFID reader on it and a scale. And that would then upload to the government database. So the government knew exactly how many cattle you had, what they weighed, all of that sort of stuff. And if a calf was born, I think you had 10 days to get it tagged and in the system. And then if a cow died, you had 10 days to report it. And so you couldn't just go haul them off to the dead pit and the government never knows about it. So if for some reason you had a disease outbreak, or if you're just not taking care of your cattle or whatever it may be, the government would show up and start asking questions about where are these cattle, or why are they losing weight, or why are they not in the system anymore. So it was and that happened while I was there, not because cattle were dying, but it was just a regular thing for the EU vets to show up unannounced, and they would point it out in the field and say, we want that bunch brought into the corrals, and we're going to hormone test them. So it didn't matter what you were doing that day. When they showed up, that had to be done. So you had to go catch horses, gather them, bring them in, sort off the ones that they wanted. And then we would just put them in a stall and put down a tarp and wait for all 5 or however many they picked to piss on that tarp, collect the piss. Then they would run their hormone tests on them to make sure they had no higher levels of hormones than they should have. And then they'd say, okay, looks great, and leave. So your whole day was kind of ruined.
Can you imagine somebody trying to pull that off in Wyoming?
No way.
Like,
no way.
You're going to hear an excavator fire up in the background.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, they would not be happy about that.
Okay, so we've got Europe checked off the list.
Yep.
Down to Africa and Asia by my count.
Yep. Then I went down to South Africa. I went directly from Sweden down to South Africa, and I worked for a organization down there called the Future Farmers Foundation. And basically what they did is they took kids from rural areas that didn't have a lot of opportunity, and they would teach them agricultural management skills. So it could be some of them raised rabbits, some of them raised produce, some of them were into beef cattle or sheep or whatever it may be. They had built a whole network of producers that were willing to have these kids come on as interns and then teach them the skills so that they could then go off and potentially manage a place for somebody else, which in the U.S., being a ranch manager is not particularly lucrative, and it's a tough job, and it kind of consumes your life. But for those kids, if they could leave that program and get a ranch management job, they would make 10 times what their parents made in most situations. So it was a massive jump in wealth for those kids to be able to do that. So I went and worked on a bunch of different beef and sheep operations that worked with that foundation. And I also I wasn't really mentoring those kids. I was learning just as much from them as they were learning from me. But I think the idea was they wanted me to kind of tell them some stories and show them where agriculture can take you if you stick with it and you're good at it, and show them all these different places around the world that they could potentially go work if they wanted to. So I was very lucky that I found those folks, and I got to see a lot of different operations in South Africa because of it.
How long were you down there for?
I went to South Africa twice. So I went down that first time I was there for 4 months. And then I left, and I missed it so much. About a year later, I went back for a second 4 months while I was down there. And I had kind of built a network of friends the second time I went down there. So I got to do some hunting and fishing and stuff the second time that I was down there.
How was that?
It was pretty dang cool. That was like one of the coolest hunting stories I've got was from that time when I went back down. And one of my really good friends that's still down there as a practicing vet, his name's Rashay, and Rashay he's like when I just picture the typical African bushman, that's him. You know, he's always got the tan shorts and tan shirt. He's got elephant hide boots on, wears shorts year round, and he's just a great outdoorsman. But he's also a veterinarian, so he's going around doing all this preg testing and vaccinating and stuff for these landowners, and he would do a lot of trading with them. So he had shot every African animal you could imagine by trading. So like he got his buffalo by trading. He vaccinated a whole herd of heifers for this guy, like 200 heifers, and got to shoot a great big bull buffalo on this guy's place. And so I went out with him. He had a friend that had a ranch out kind of in the Karoo, and we went out looking for springbuck. And with I guess it was the third day, we had walked all over this place, and I blew one shot at like 300 yards over top of the springbuck. And then we never really saw a shooter buck after that. And I thought I had ruined my only chance to shoot something down there. So the last morning we went out, and we found 2 bucks. They weren't great big bucks, but shooters. And so I'm laying on this rock. The sun is coming up, this like burning red sunrise coming up. And I'm laying on the rock, and Rashay's looking through the glass. And he's like, yeah, just let him get closer. He doesn't know we're here. Just let him keep coming. So I'm laying there, and off in the distance, I thought I could hear a truck like a diesel truck driving in it, but that wouldn't have made sense because there was no roads really where we were. And it just kept getting louder. And I thought, what in the hell could be out here making that rumbling sound? And I look over at Riche, and he's looking at me kind of grinning, but I still couldn't figure out what it was. And I didn't want to ask him because we're trying to be as quiet as possible. And as it got louder, I realized it was a pride of lions roaring.
Mm-hmm.
And once they really started getting after it, I realized they were just on the other side of the ridge from us. And so this springbuck gets like 200 yards out, and Riche's like, all right, go ahead, shoot him. And I said, there's no way, man. I've got 3 bullets total. I'm not going to shoot this thing and ring the dinner bell, and then we got a whole pride of lions on the other side of the hill. And he's giggling. He said, no, just shoot it. And I said, I'm not going to shoot it. I would rather just leave and have the story. And he finally, he's like, all right, if you're not going to shoot it, he's like, I'll tell you. On the other side of that hill, there is a pride of lions, but there's a 15-foot game fence, and that's a preserve.
Yeah.
You just can't see the fence. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, that's fine. So I shot this springbuck and dropped him. And I ended up shooting 2 of them and then a mountain reed buck while I was there. So it was, cool. I didn't get to do any of the like real crazy hunting while I was over there, but it was kind of like antelope hunting in Wyoming. Springbuck, it was a lot of fun.
They're delicious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he showed me this trick that I realized it's the same on pronghorn. Nobody had ever mentioned this before, but after I shot that first springbuck, he said, okay, now we got to hustle. And we ran up to that thing, and he said, if you get there fast enough, they've got this gland right above their tail that opens up, and it's really sweet smelling. But it's only open like for a short amount of time after they die. And so he showed me that, and I thought, wow, that's really neat. And this thing reminds me a lot of a pronghorn. So the next pronghorn I shot, I ran up to it, and sure enough, same thing. It has that kind of sweet smelling gland that would open up on its back.
Yeah, I thought it kind of smelled like honey.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
And I don't know if that's common knowledge in Wyoming where I've done all that hunting, but nobody had ever mentioned that to me. And then he showed me that. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. All this stuff you learn.
And it is one of the most valuable things about traveling and having these experiences in other places is what pieces of it you get to bring home with you, and the way that changes the way that you just live and understand your own home. Mm-hmm. I would also like to point out for everybody listening, I was not the one to bring up hunting this time. Okay. So, I mean, Asia, did we do it? Did you get there?
Yeah. So, well, before I went to Asia, I went back to the U.S. and I was calving, or I guess it was not calving season yet, but it was starting to get snowy and there wasn't a lot of work. So I started to get itchy feet, and I knew I was going to Asia. I knew it was going to take a fair amount of money to make that happen, but I just wanted to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. So while I was in Rome, I had met this guy in a nightclub that I watched him just get pummeled by this Italian girl. And there was a guy that had walked by and touched this girl's ass, and he just kept on going. And she turned around and thought it was the guy standing next to me and threw her drink in his face and started smacking the shit out of him. And I'm laughing because I had seen the whole thing, and she walks off, and I turned to him. I said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing, but I saw the whole thing. That was pretty funny.
It is funny.
And
you should definitely laugh.
And he kind of started laughing too once it was over. And I get to talking to him, and he asked where I was from. I said the U.S., and he's like, oh, I'm from Mexico. And I never would have thought I'd meet a Mexican in Rome.
Right.
But this guy, he was with a group of tourists over there traveling around, and he said, what are you doing over here? And I said, I'm just traveling around the world working on ranches. And he said, my dad's got a big ranch in Mexico. If you ever want to go, let me know. So I had kept that guy on Facebook for about a year after that. And so when I was just bored and I didn't want a real expensive trip, but an easy one, I went to Mexico and worked for his dad. And that got pretty wild down there with all the cartel stuff happening. And I kind of ended up accidentally in the middle of a cartel gunfight. It was like a turf war thing. And they weren't after me, but I was still kind of in the crossfire of it. And so that was, in that moment, is when I decided that I should probably start writing this stuff down. So that was kind of the birth of the idea of writing a book.
Is that the first time you'd been shot at?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think inadvertently I'd been shot at, with 22s, prairie dog hunting and stuff like that. But that was the first time I'd ever, like knowingly seen people shooting at each other and then shooting at me.
How'd it feel?
It was pretty scary. How'd
it feel afterwards?
It was a lot like bull riding, I guess. You get that rush and it's like, that was pretty cool.
It's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the story is awesome after it's done. And really, after the initial shock of like, okay, this is happening right now, then I was so aware of everything after that. Like once you get over the very initial shock of it, then it's like you're on another level when that sort of stuff's happening. I'm sure you know way more about that than that one. I've only had that one experience, but.
No, I think it's much the same. And those survival instincts that kick in for us that allow for that heightened level of awareness, and it changes your ability to judge people and their intentions. It's lasting in some ways. Like it can click back in pretty quickly if it needs to.
Right.
But before you're in that situation, you can do all the training and you don't really have it until your body gets forced into that mental state and that physical state. And yeah, it can change you. If you're exposed to it for a long period of time, then it takes a really long time to get out of it. And it's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
Like, it took me years before I could not have the most tactically sound seat in a restaurant.
Yeah.
And now I can do it, but I have to force myself to be like, you know what? It'll probably be okay.
Yeah.
If something really goes on, I'll just turn around,
Right.
We'll figure it out from that point.
Yeah.
But we're just having hamburgers here. It's probably going to be okay.
You're right. Yeah.
But no, that's interesting. Glad you didn't get shot. That wouldn't have been any fun.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't have. Another thing I saw, since you bring that up, first time, I think it was the first time I ever saw it was down in Mexico, being around, because I was beyond just that actual gunfight. There was a lot of sicarios and guys that I would see on a pretty daily basis or run into. And I think what got me out of it unscathed is that I didn't ask questions. If it wasn't my business, I would just leave. It was a pretty common thing that I'd overhear guys say, like, who's this gringo? Do we need to do something about this? And I would just leave. I wasn't running away, but I was leaving that situation. That would happen we were cutting corn. That was part of the job that I did when I was down there. And our trucks that were hauling that corn out of there was Escalades pulling in. And I didn't ask what they were doing. I didn't want to know. I would go to the other side of the field when that stuff went down, and I wanted to know no more than I needed to know.
Yeah, they just wanted to check on their corn shipment.
I'm sure that's exactly, yeah. I didn't ask the truck drivers. I didn't want to know whose Escalades those were. But I think it was the first time I ran into this, is some of those guys, when you would see them and you could look in their eyes, there's a look in people's eyes where it's, I've heard it called the 1,000-yard stare or whatever it may be. And I've seen it several times since, but just almost dead inside, their eyes are just looking right through you. And that is one of the, I had a kind of a scary interaction with a guy that was one of the head sicarios down there for a really powerful guy. And it wasn't violent or anything like that, but I could just see in his eyes, it was terrifying to look into that guy's eyes and see that there was just nothing there, he was home, but his eye, he saw me as nothing other than a chunk of meat, I guess, I wasn't really a person to him. And I've run across a couple of people like that, and since then, that are people can only imagine what they have seen or done or been through. But it was pretty wild to see that firsthand.
Yeah. Yeah. It's different from most of the guys that you're ever going to run into in the U.S. military, but you can also tell who's actually been in combat. Even like years later, you can see it from across the parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it does leave a mark. Like you can really tell. But some of those folks, like what you're talking about, who just kind of have that stone cold killer look to them, I think that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different thing, but it's also very recognizable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just looks like evil.
Yeah.
I mean, like it's there's some evil stuff that happens down there with dealing with those guys, and I can only imagine that, you know, what that does to a person being part of that.
Exactly. So if you're doing that job, right, and you're doing somebody else's bidding and committing acts of violence against people that you may not know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're going to have to do something psychologically to distance yourself from the humanity of all that. And by doing so, you have to destroy part of your own humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which part of Mexico was that?
Chihuahua. Yeah.
Sporty.
Yeah. So it was not too far from the border, and
Yep.
I wasn't on the border, but it was, you know, probably a 6-hour drive, easy drive.
Yeah.
So you could stage whatever they stage there for the border, and off they'd go. It would be, you'd see one truck a day probably come through full of federales, and they have those racks in the bed. So all guys like kitted up, they got body armor on and everything coming through. But for every one of those federales you'd see probably 2 or 3 guys that are not in uniforms, but they're still plated up and they're just as well armed, and they got masks on, and those guys would roll through pretty regular too.
Yeah.
And they did, like, I never had to deal with them, but I'd see it all the time.
Yeah. And oftentimes it's just different colors of the same team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in Mexico a year or 2 ago, and I was in a very touristy area, but I'd wandered away from the touristy part of town, and I was looking for a haircut, and I saw a barber pole a couple blocks away. Walked down there, and as soon as I walked in the door, the look of the people that was in there instantly told me that I was not where I was meant to be. Right? Yeah. There was a bunch of really pretty gals, a bunch of really hard looking dudes who were all tatted up, and it was a tattoo shop and a barber shop.
Yeah.
They had 2 seats in the barber shop. Nobody was speaking English, and I was like one foot in the door, and I was like, nope, not my spot. And I started to back out, and this barber who was standing there, he's holding a straight razor in his hand. He just nodded at me and pointed to the chair. I was like, all right, I'm in it. Let's do this. And he didn't say a word to me. He didn't ask me what kind of haircut I wanted, anything like that. And I sat down, probably took 45 minutes, best haircut of my life, bar none. And, we got done, got cleaned up. I stood up, reached for my wallet. He shook his head, pointed to the door, and out I went.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was great.
Yeah. And you never know, like with stuff like that, I could have done you a huge favor there, because I've, like, even on the reservation in Wyoming, one of my buddies had a story like that where he went into a bar that he shouldn't have gone into.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the only white guy in there. And he kind of realized, okay, well, I probably don't need to be here. And he turned around to leave. And this one big older guy at the end of the Indian guy at the end of the bar, he said, no, you're going to sit right here. So he said, no, it's fine. He said, nope, you're sitting right here. He said, buy me a beer. So he bought him a beer, and he said, okay, I'm headed out of here. He said, no, you're going to sit here and drink a beer with me. And that happened about 3 times before finally, he was getting scared. And finally this guy said, okay, you're good to go. He said, you don't even understand the favor I did you.
Right.
He said there was 4 guys standing right outside that door that if you would have come in here and turned around and walked right back out, they'd have jumped you and took you for everything you're worth if you would have survived it.
Sure.
He said, those were the best 3 beers you've ever bought in your life. See you later.
You never know how things work out.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was interesting. Well, I got to hear about Asia.
Yeah. So initially I looked at Japan because I had seen, everybody's heard of Kobe beef or Wagyu beef at this point. And so I thought maybe I could go over there and work in that kind of industry, but I didn't know anything about it. And then I saw a video on YouTube of these guys tripping down wild horses just out on the grass flatland. And I thought, where's this? So I looked into it more, and it was Mongolia.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, man, that's what I want to go do. I don't want to go work in Japan in a feedlot. So I started looking into all this Mongolian stuff, and I found out that Mongolian horses are really cheap. You can buy good broke horses for about $500, or you could at that time. And so I thought, well, I'll just go over there and buy a saddle horse and a pack horse, and I'll just go ride around Mongolia and see what I can find. Spend like 2 months there doing that. And I was looking through Instagram and Facebook, anywhere I could find to see what information I could find. And I found this guy named Eric, who is, he was an American guy that spent a lot of time in Mongolia. So I started asking him questions just through Instagram about where I should go, where I should buy horses, stuff like that. And he said, well, if you want to go over there, you don't have to, but I'm planning this trip to go live with the last people on Earth that still ride reindeer as their main source of transportation. So if you'd like to go, it's a tough trip, and you got to know your way around a horse, and you got to, have some kind of international understanding of what's going on, outside the U.S. And he said, it looks like you know both of those things. So if you're willing to pay your way and get up there, you can come with me. And I thought, how could I pass that up? So I spent all of my money to go with Eric and get up there to the Tsaden tribe that still rides the reindeer. And so there's really only one airport in Mongolia, and it's in Ulaanbaatar, in the capital. And Ulaanbaatar is a very new city by city standards, I guess, because they didn't have a capital in Mongolia until the Soviet Union took them over and said, look, you can't all just be wandering around out here living in tents. We need to be able to meet somewhere and land airplanes and all that stuff. So you got to have at least a city. So they built the capital under Soviet rule. And so still today, I think it's like 60 or 70% of the country is nomadic. And they live in gers, like big canvas walled tents. And they just move with the grass and move with their animals. And they do kind of congregate in the wintertime around the city because it's easier to get coal or firewood or whatever to heat those tents. But all summer long, they're just spread out, horseback, living off the land and raising livestock. So I flew into the capital, and then I think we took a bush plane kind of out into a dirt airstrip on the northern part of Mongolia. And we landed there, and we jumped in these Russian furgons, like they're like jacked up 4-wheel drive minivans. And it was 3 days. There's really not roads or infrastructure in Mongolia, so you just got to know the right 2-track to take. And so we had local guys take us out in these furgons out to a horse camp where it was a mom and 5 or 6 sons that lived in there, and they owned hundreds of horses, and so they leased us horses to get up there. And their brother had married essentially like the princess of that reindeer tribe. So they had a better idea of where to look for them, even though they didn't have any sort of like radio communication. They at least knew the valley they would be in. So we rode with those brothers. It was probably, I think it was 4 days up into the mountains horseback. And once we got into that valley, the brothers just said, start watching for reindeer. Because once we find, they'll be herding them. So if you see one, there's going to be a person nearby, and then they can direct us to where we're going. So we found the reindeer, went up there and met with those people, and we spent like 2 weeks living up there out of teepees. And the Tsaden people speak a different language. They don't speak Mongolian, and it's kind of a dying culture. Like probably within our lifetime it won't exist anymore because there's less and less every year, and the kids generally they don't send them off to school, but if they do, they very rarely come back to that culture. So slowly dying, and it's entirely government subsidized at this point. So they just collect checks from the government, and they live in teepees. They're the only ones over there that actually live in like what we know in the U.S. as a teepee. Everybody else lived in, a lot of people call them yurts. Right. That's the Russian word for it, but that's what most people there lived in, except the Tsaden people. They lived in teepees.
Interesting. What kind of horse were you on?
So the Mongolian horses they're really short and choppy and tough, just dirty tough. I asked them about shoeing horses when I was over there, and that was just a completely foreign idea to them. They don't put shoes on them. They don't pick up their feet. They're just entirely self-reliant horses. Another thing I learned when I was reading a book is that they're actually not horses, and they're closer related to a donkey.
The Mongolian wild ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Przewalski's horse, which they say is like the most pure horse, comes from that area, Kazakhstan and Mongolia.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are all descendants of those horses. So they've all got the tiger stripe legs and the dun stripe down their right down their back.
Mm-hmm.
And they're little and they're tough and they can just go all day. And they act a little bit different than horses. They're similar, but they just have mannerisms and things that you wouldn't expect from a quarter horse or a thoroughbred.
Yeah. I'm very interested about the animal movements around that Bering Land Bridge time of like 10,000 to 14,000 years ago. Because we know that horses and camels, started in North America and left. There's been some interesting, at least hypotheses about whether Appaloosas were in both Mongolia and North America at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a hard time believing that that the only horses in North America are descendants from Spanish stock.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a good chance that some horses crossed on the Bering Land Bridge as well, or equines of one type or another.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me one bit.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, such a powerful equine culture as well. I mean, you think about what the Mongolians did, and they assembled the largest controlled landmass ever in human history, and they did it with the horse and the recurve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In two guys' lifetimes.
Right. Yeah. Super interesting. And another thing that I think is so fascinating about that is they allowed local culture to remain. They let people roll with their same religions and cultures and customs. That is really abnormal for a conquering force.
Right. Yeah, and what I noticed with Mongolians still today, and I just finished watching that Genghis Khan or Chinggis Khan documentary. It was on Amazon or something. I was watching it when I was in Canada, but they are all about being light and fast.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even today, those guys, if they leave on a week-long pack trip to ride across the country, those guys will wear a deal, which is like a very heavy insulated bathrobe, and that's the only real clothes that they bring. They don't bring a bedroll. They don't bring any of that stuff. Their saddle pad is just a folded-up canvas tent. They don't pack poles because they just cut down trees where they need them, and they carve stakes out of wood when they get there. So they don't pack anything extra, and they'll throw like a bag of noodles and sometimes some dried meat on their horse. But those guys can go for weeks without anything. And still to this day, their halters, I brought one back with me. A normal horse halter nowadays that you see will just have like rope or fabric underneath the chin. But in Mongolia, it's actually a bit. And so it's a bent, like snaffle bit that fits the curve of the horse's chin. And that goes all the way back to Chinggis Khan's army, that you had to be ready to go to war, sometimes for years at a time, with like 5 minutes notice. And so they had the bits built into the halter. So all you had to do was slide it down, pop it in that horse's mouth, and then tie the lead rope around the back to the other side. And you had the bridle on the horse ready to go. And so they're all about speed and agility and doing it as light and fast as possible. And I think from a military standpoint, that was also what they did. They were in and out very fast, and they could outride anybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they changed maneuver warfare in a big way because they could just move faster than anybody. You know? Yeah, pretty incredible people. Did you see any elk?
No.
Yeah.
I did not see any alcohol. So, something that I noticed is so there's really not much government there. There's really no private land and there's no fences. So you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. You can free graze wherever you want. So their pastures were pretty overgrazed.
Yeah.
I mean, millions and millions of acres of grassland just hammered for hundreds and hundreds of years. So there was not a lot of extra food out there for wild animals. So I never even saw a deer while I was there, which was surprising to me. They told me that wolves were a problem in the north. I never saw a wild wolf, but a lot of those the Tsarin people had wolf dogs that lived with them that they had stolen from dens and stuff. So they were there, and then bears were an issue. Never saw those either.
Yeah.
But it seemed like a lot of their wildlife had been all but depleted because there was really nobody there governing it or saying who can take what. So if an animal ran out and it was a wild animal, they were more than likely going to shoot it because nobody was going to stop them from doing it.
You know, we did a podcast episode previously with Dennis Sheehy, who spent a huge amount of time over there working on grazing issues in Mongolia. And I think he has a PhD around that, actually. But yeah, very interesting stuff and a difficult thing to change that culture on.
Right. And they, you know, with the boundaries nowadays, we have these borders and stuff that they can't cross. And that was never an issue back in the day. You know,
it's not their border. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not what they recognize. Even the Tsarin people, they were telling us that there's actually quite a few of them that live up in Siberia as well. And forever they had a northern and southern range. And then with the Soviet Union coming in, they said, okay, that's enough of that. You don't just get to keep crossing the border back and forth. So pick a side and we will assign you citizenship once you pick a side. So, you know, anybody that was there along the borders was kind of split at that point. And I think probably also you look at historically, there would have been kind of, I don't know what you would call them, chiefs or something, you know, people that kind of had a higher power over these rangelands so that they, instead of there being 100 horse herds of 20 to 40 horses running that all belong to different guys, there would have been one guy running 2,000 horses, or maybe they were split amongst other people, but there was one bunch and you could come in, graze that and leave. And with more and more people having smaller herds in that country, I would think that would have a huge impact because you're going to swoop in and pick up whatever grass you can, because if you don't, that the next guy will, rather than having somebody say, how about we just graze that for 2 weeks and then we're out of here and we'll go to the other side of the mountain range and graze that over there.
Did you enjoy riding reindeer?
Yeah, it was cool. They're not fast. They're not strong. They, you know, people ask me that all. The cover of my book is a buck and reindeer, and that I just thought that was funny.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think a reindeer could buck you off. And really, even the big bull, that there's a picture on the back of my book that is me riding the bull reindeer. Even that one, the biggest one they had, if I really wanted to, I could have hopped off and tripped that sucker down and thrown him on the ground.
Yeah.
So they're not terribly strong or fast, but it was the smoothest animal I've ever ridden. It felt like you were just on glass, and they have massive feet.
Right.
So they, you know, like in Wyoming, we have bogs up in the mountains, and if you ride your horse across those, you can sink them up to the eyeballs, and either they die or you get a tractor there or something, but they, you know, they're dangerous. It's like quicksand. And so stuff that you would never even dream of riding a horse across, those reindeer could just walk right across it. And it wouldn't bother because their feet were so huge. They were bigger than a horse foot, and they weighed probably a quarter of what a horse weighed. So it was pretty amazing to see where they could go and graze and the type of forage that they would eat. You know, they could eat anything really and survive off that.
What's the relationship between cowboying and music?
I think for a very long time, people have lived with livestock, and it can be a very lonely livelihood. You're just with animals all day. They don't talk to you. So I think for as long as people have been living with livestock, they've been singing to them or singing to entertain themselves. So all around the world, there's different herding songs and things that are a main staple in their culture. And that's no different with the American cowboy. Coming up the trail, people were singing the whole way from Texas to Montana or into Canada. Same with night herding. It's very lonesome out there by yourself. You're the only guy riding in a circle around a herd all night long. And so it kind of became the birth of cowboy songs and poetry probably too. So, but I think it's intertwined in all livestock cultures, singing or storytelling of all kinds.
And how does that knowledge in your background inform the way that you work in the music industry now?
Yeah, so there's all these cowboys that I knew or I had worked with at one time or another could sing songs, and some of them were professional at it, but most of them weren't. And I had this idea, like, what if I went out and started documenting some of these guys that don't have the chance to get to town? People don't even know they play music, or they don't. It's just not known, and I think people should hear some of those songs. So I don't have a musical background, and I didn't work in the music industry until recently, in the past 3 years, really, because I wrote my book while I was night calving in Montana and Wyoming.
Good time to do it.
It was a perfect time. I'd go check cows every hour and then come back in and sit down and write. And so the entire book was written that way, and then it was all edited in that same
every
format.
Hour. That's diligent.
Yeah. I would work the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. And most people don't want that, or people will try and work all day and then get up and do the night checks. But I would always volunteer to just don't wake me up during the day, and I will stay up all night long and check all the cattle. And so during those times is when I, over the course of 4 years, wrote the book.
One of my most embarrassing hunting moments was while night calving in Montana.
Oh, yeah.
With my buddy Ben Slatt up on the edge of the Bob Marshall Wilderness, which is maybe the grizzly bear capital of the universe. And his dad I'd asked him what time of year they started seeing bears, and he said tomorrow. Like tomorrow's the day every year. I was like, all right. And we had a heifer that was going to calve, and we brought her in, and they'd had a terrible time that year with having to do a lot of C-sections.
Mm-hmm.
His dad was really good at it. He could do it super fast. Didn't need to bring a vet in or anything. And brought this heifer in just in case we had to give her C-section, just keep her in this little pen. Went back out to check on her, and all the boards were broken down. And, first calf heifer can act a little goofy, as you know,
mm-hmm.
but look for her for the rest of the night, can't find her. And first light in the morning, Ben comes in and he goes, I think a bear got her and dragged her across the creek. And we go over there, and there's this big mudslide, and then the willows are kind of matted down. And I had a 338, which was plenty enough gun. And Ben had a shotgun, so we decided we were going to go try and find this bear that had for sure killed this heifer. And so we start walking through the willows in this creek bottom. And next thing I know, I see some limbs moving, and I see brown fur scooting past me. And I was throwing that rifle up and stepping backwards, and I fell down, and I hear this big commotion in the water. And what we had seen was a beaver. And the mudslide was the beaver. And the willows that were knocked down was the beaver. And we found the heifer, and she had just busted out. But we were so keyed up with a grizzly on our minds, anything moving was going to be a bear. Mercy. But no, that was a fun job in college, and they're a good outfit and learned a lot from them. But tell me a little bit about the music festival that's going to be next year.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then I also want people to know where they can find your book.
Yeah. So the festival we had our first one this past year in May, the last weekend of May, in Gillette, Wyoming. It's called Dusty Vaquero Days. And
sorry I couldn't make it.
Yeah. Well, next year we'll get you out there.
Yeah.
It'll be hopefully bigger and better next year. Like first year festivals fail all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to have a music festival, and some of them work and some of them don't. But the whole idea behind this one is I've been shooting these YouTube videos with working cowboy musicians for the past 3 years, and I thought, man, it would be really cool if I could get all these guys in one spot at the same time. And so that was kind of the genesis of this festival. It's just a bunch of working cowboy guys that I've done YouTube videos with in the past, and I called them up and said, what do you think about being in Gillette, Wyoming on this weekend? And we made it work. So this past year we had a really good turnout for the first year, and it went as good as it could have gone. So we're starting the planning for 2026, and we still have a lot of pieces to put in place still, but it'll be in Gillette, Wyoming, and it'll most likely be the last weekend of May. We're still getting that all locked down with the venue, but it should, like 90% chance it'll be the last weekend of May.
Let me know those dates as soon as you can,
Mm-hmm.
because I'd like to go over there and set up a podcast area and start recording shows with those guys and helping spread the word, because man, those are the people that I like the most. Are blue collar artists,
right.
And they're fantastic humans, and they're always interesting.
Yeah,
they've got great stories. They have such a cool perspective on life, and if somebody can be skilled at any kind of art and also do a job that gives them rough hands, those are my people.
Yeah, absolutely. And this next year, we had some vendors there the first year, but I wasn't quite sure how many people would show up, how much room we would have, and all that. So it was pretty light on the vendors. But this coming year, I really want to push. I want to get as many Western artists there as I can find. So saddle, leather workers, silver painters, whatever it may be. But it's going to be Western art. I don't want it to be cotton candy stands and massage chairs and stuff. I'm hoping to get a pretty good size vendor area. So even if these folks are not necessarily musicians, they'll still be working cowboy artists, and I want to get them as many involved as possible this year.
We got to get a tattooer out there.
Already working on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good.
That we were going to try and get it the first year, and then there was some things about health codes, which I never really thought about.
Wyoming has those?
Apparently you've got to have I don't know how hard it is to get, but we tried to do it last minute and there just wasn't time. But I've got lots of tattoos that I've gotten in barns and kitchens and, not very sanitary areas. And so it just never crosses my mind. Oh yeah, you probably need health codes up to snuff on that sort of stuff. So
yeah, but there's a way.
Yeah, we'll get at least one. But if there's any Western, people that are tattoo artists into the Western stuff, we'd love to have you.
Cool.
But yeah.
And then how can they get a hold of you for that?
DustyVaqueroDays.com.
Okay.
Is the website, and pretty easy to find.
Where can people find the book?
You can find it on Amazon that's the quickest way, or you can send me a DM on Instagram if you want something special, and it's also on Audible.
What's the title?
The Lost Cowboy.
Okay. Who read it on Audible?
My buddy Devin Riley read it, and I thought about reading it myself, but I kind of live out of my van, and he doesn't really do it anymore, but he had a podcast for a long time, so he had all the mics and everything, and he thought, well, I could do it. And Devin's a really cool guy, big time hunter, and was also like a world-class bareback rider. He set the arena record in Tucson. He was 93 points on a horse named Killer Bee, and he was a badass bareback rider.
93-point bareback ride is something
insane.
Yeah.
But he had a pretty bad wreck, and it didn't catch up with him immediately, but he had some spinal cord issues.
Yeah, it's not good for your health.
Not good for you.
Yeah.
And so he's had some problems with his hands and arms from that injury. And because of that, kind of ended his career sooner than he would have liked. And so he got into the podcasting and all this other stuff. So he was a great dude to have read the book, and worked out really well. I think he did a really good job. So it's on Audible if people are into listening rather than reading.
Man, I am. I think I'm probably close to 10-1 for books I listen to versus actually crack the cover on.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. I listened to a ton of books, and when the book came out, I had so many people tell me, I listen to podcasts and books when I'm in the leather shop or the tractor or whatever. And so Devin did a killer job, but it took him, I don't know what it was, 6-8 months, something like that. He'd read a chapter or two a day. And I'd never really realized how difficult that was. But if you think about it, like, you can't have one mess up per chapter reading out loud.
Right.
So it's a lot of cutting and editing and rereading pieces. And so it was an undertaking to have him put that together. But it's out there. And Coulter Wall wrote the foreword to the book. And so I bugged him and got him to read the foreword for the audiobook. So he did that, and then a couple of the musicians that I work with on a regular basis, they did like the intro, outro music and all that other stuff. So it's got its own kind of spin, my personal spin on the audiobook.
I like it. Cool. I'll check that out for sure. Okay. Anything else we need to talk about?
I don't think so. That kind of covers
It's
what
quite a story. I'm curious to see what happens next for you.
Yeah, I've been thinking about doing a round 2. It's kind of, at this point, the book came out in 2023, so it's been out a couple years, but all this traveling happened between the ages of 21 and 25, and I'm 31 now, so I haven't really gone out and done any real crazy international adventuring since I was 25 years old, prior to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would like to go do it again. But this time I'd like to take a film crew and film it, because a lot of I started taking a camera later on, in some of the later countries, but like Australia and Argentina, those two places, there's hardly any pictures at all, because I had like an old 16 gig iPhone that you take one picture and it's full. And so I would love to go back and do like a second lap, but get some actual video of the whole thing. So that may be the next big project I work on.
There's a lot of experiences out there in the world if you go and find them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, super cool story, man. Thank you. Let's go get some dinner.
Sweet. Sounds good.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time out of their busy lives to write a review for the show and share it with their friends. I'm extremely proud of how intelligent, engaged, and adventurous this audience is. Original music for the Six Ranch podcast is written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Harlander. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.